Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound Radio MMA podcast. Yeah, it's been so many years saying MMA radio show, but this is a podcast. I don't know. I inherited the name. Don't blame me. Should be a relatively straightforward show this evening. I don't anticipate too much, but on the docket for this evening, we have a review of UFC on ESPN Plus 7 from Saturday morning. The UFC was back in Russia. This was their first visit to the city of St. Petersburg, a beautiful city, by all accounts. I've never been there. But and I said I think the first time I really looked at that card that it wasn't great on paper, but it was positioned to overperform. And I think it did overperform relative to expectations. So we'll go through the action from that, such as it was. The UFC is back on ESPN proper this Saturday for UFC on ESPN 3, Jacare versus Hermanson. Oh, no, are they on ESPN for the? Okay, this might have changed. I apologize. Apparently, this is the main card for this is on ESPN Plus, so I am gonna have to change a few things there. I'm mistaken. I thought that was going to be on ESPN proper, and parts of it will be, but the majority of this is on ESPN. The main card is on ESPN Plus, so we'll go over that. It's a surprisingly solid card. I mean, you got a great main event. You have a couple of fights with high violence potential. I'm largely okay with this card, so we'll go over that. And not a whole lot of news this week. Darren Till got himself arrested. BJ Penn continues to have legal trouble. And the UFC announced a few more dates and venues in the future for this year. There's kind of sporadic. They announced one for August, one for September, and one for November. So a lot of space in between these. But so for the I will touch a little bit on that, and I think that'll be it. So we shouldn't be here forever, at least, talking about this stuff. Back with me this week after a couple of weeks off due to some scheduling conflicts, but Jeff Harris is back with us. Everybody, so I'm sure everyone's happy about this. Jeff, happy to have you back. Glad you're here. How you doing?
Robert Winfrey, 411 Ground and Pound Radio Show. Come to us in your darkness, for the night is dark and full of terrors. I'm Jeffrey Harris.
I always preferred the night. Not a day guy. Certainly not a morning person. Which made the early morning coverage for UFC on ESPN Plus 7 a bit annoying, but let's jump into the main event there.
I have a question.
Sure.
Am I a bad person that I was not impressed with Israel Adesanya last week?
You're not a bad person for it.
I mean, I know I predicted Kelvin Gastelum, but Adesanya did give up 2 rounds in that fight. Come on.
I mean, Gastelum won 2 rounds of that fight. I don't think that's the same thing.
I'm just saying I saw tons of flaws in Adesanya's game in that fight. For a guy who had all that size and reach advantage in the fight, he had a lot of trouble establishing his size and reach advantage.
I think a lot of that was down to Kelvin being incredibly well prepared for that more than anything else.
Right. Adesanya looked, for the first round and a half, he looked to be in a lot of trouble.
He also, if you don't present him with a very obvious opening, he doesn't mind taking that first round and a half to get a read on you. I mean, Anderson Silva did much the same thing. John Jones does kind of the same thing. It's truly, I mean, even if we go outside of MMA, maybe the best boxer in the world right now, Vasily Lomachenko, does kind of the same thing.
It rarely happened to Anderson Silva.
Now, Anderson spent plenty, unless you gave him a very obvious opening, he would frequently take 3 to 5 minutes to just get a read on you.
Maybe,
again, if you're Forrest Griffin and you do the charge forward with my chin open thing, then sure, but
like the Dan Henderson fight, it didn't seem like Dan was really dominating him in that first round.
No, not dominating, but he won. He won that round.
Yeah, but Kelvin hurt Adesanya clearly. He tagged him more than once.
Yeah, he landed a good couple of punches in that first round.
I'm just saying, against a healthy Robert Whittaker, I'm picking Robert Whittaker in that fight.
I mean, that was my stance before this fight, and it remains my stance now, but there's still...
In that fight, it was really the 5th round that won Adesanya the fight. And it was a good performance in the 5th round. I don't know, but I'm not quite on the hype train. I'm still not on the hype train like you are.
That's fine.
I don't think it was a star-making performance.
I suppose that depends on what you consider star-making.
Well, I mean, certainly, like, the way he pushed forward and he got all those knockdowns. But, I mean, how about the chin on Gastelum in that?
Oh, yeah. I think both guys' stock rose, all things considered.
Well,
I mean, Gastelum, you are entirely correct. Gastelum's chin is otherworldly.
Gastelum, I think maybe he's not, like, I think Gastelum's good. I'm just not sure he's championship level. I think he's, like, maybe top 5 level. I just don't think he's capable of gutting through it and winning the title.
Some of that some of that kind of depends. I mean, that the performance he turned in that fight would have beaten the vast majority of middleweights, and and Adesanya would have finished the vast majority of middleweights, especially in that 5th. I mean, both guys just showed tremendous heart.
I think he'd give like Jacare, Yoel Romero a tough fight, but does he beat Bobby Knuckles? Not so sure. I don't
know. It's tough because, I mean, we've seen Whittaker be resilient, but Gastelum has a couple of things that very particularly mean he can always win a fight.
I still consider Bobby Knuckles the ace of this division, unless his health just continues failing.
No, I agree. Again, I would have favored Robert Whittaker against either of them before that fight. I continue to give him a slight edge against both of them after it. Now that said, would I be surprised if either of them were to beat him? No. We're talking about demonstrably elite MMA. You shouldn't be surprised when anybody beats anybody.
5th round in Gastelum Adesanya. What did you score the 5th round?
10-8 Adesanya.
Okay. I think that's fair. So not 10-7?
No.
Okay.
If
Gastelum had enough offense in the 5th round for it to be 10-8 and not.
Yeah. No, it takes something pretty spectacular for me to consider. When I consider awarding a 10-7, that usually means there's either a point deduction and then a 10-8, or the ref just flat out should have stopped the fight and didn't. And I don't think either of those circumstances.
Poirier versus Holloway was a good fight.
Yeah.
Good on Poirier. Grant versus Joe Bam was abysmal. Joe Bam has no one to blame but himself for that loss. Throwing a temper tantrum like a 10-year-old child. It's embarrassing.
I mean, on the one hand, I get it. You get half as much money. But on the other hand, like, he was complaining, like, I want to talk to the judges. Buddy, you didn't give them anything to... I don't think the judges were wrong.
Well, he didn't do any... I mean, one judge was... Because, look, we had a 30-27 one way, and 2 others had 29-28. That's a little lame, don't you think?
I think you could legitimately score 30-27 for either guy. And I think in that case, whatever.
I think my problem was nothing happened in that fight until like the last 30 seconds or so. And I don't know what, like, Joe Bam was not the one moving forward and really engaging the fight. And he wasn't really, the fight was awful.
It was not a very good fight.
Thank goodness for the last 2 fights. Anyway, I'm ready to talk about ESPN +7 or however we're
+7, Fight Night 149. I mean, use whatever nomenclature you want to use.
So,
your main event, Alistair Overeem defeated Alexei Oleinik via TKO, via knees and punches, 4:45 of the first round. This was an odd fight, but it was oddly entertaining. I mean, Oleinik pulling guard the first time they clinch up because that's what he does. Then not being able to maintain it. And then after that, he went full on I mean, I want to. It was awkward in a lot of respects, but I almost want to. But I have to applaud elements of just, you know what? I'm going forward, and this guy's going to hit me. He's going to knee me, and I'm going to gut through it as long as I can. He threw a lot of body shots. He kept a just ridiculous pace for heavyweights. Credit to Overeem, who got tagged a couple of times, but defended himself appropriately and seemed to remember that he's one of like 3 heavyweights with a genuine game from the clinch. And he landed some really solid knees to the body and head. One of them just finally dropped Oleinik, and that was it. I mean, nothing great, nothing world-shattering here, but a solid enough fight. After the fight, Overeem said he'd be open to them rebooking the Alexander Volkov fight, which, if you'll remember, was supposed to be the main event here. I'm still interested in that fight, so if you can make that happen, go for it. I mean, Overeem's still a little bit out of the title picture, but the title picture at heavyweight right now is very, very weird.
Oleinik is not like I would consider an elite class world beater, but at least going into this fight, he was coming off 2 back-to-back submission wins, one over Mark Hunt. Submitted Travis Brown for whatever that's worth in 2017.
I mean, it's worth his paycheck.
well, I mean, yeah, I guess he had a decent record going into this. I mean,
these two combined for a ridiculously high number of just fights in general. I saw somebody on Twitter mention that, you know, Alexei Oleinik has the MMA record of a professional boxer from the early 90s. You just fight every opportunity. You just take a fight at every available opportunity.
He has close to 70 fights now.
Yeah, these two guys have like 100 and almost 200 fights between them.
You don't see that a lot today in high level MMA. But granted, Oleinik has only been in the UFC since 2000, a little under 5 years.
Oleinik spent a lot of time not fighting elite level opposition, and I say that not to be dismissive of his accomplishments, but just as a fact of he spent a lot of time on the regional scene across various places. And while that's still to be commended for going out there and winning in those circumstances, because this is MMA and people lose those kinds of fights, he's not been, you know, competing against a consistent level of, say, top 20 heavyweights in the world.
Now, heavyweight's a bit weird because now we have Kane came back and lost, and Ngannou's surging again.
Well, Ngannou and Dos Santos are scheduled to fight.
They're fighting, and Stipe is basically the de facto backup for Brock Lesnar if that fight doesn't come together.
We don't know what's up with Brock. Also, yeah, there's a lot of murkiness.
Yeah.
It is. It's a really odd division. So I liked Overeem being open to them rebooking him and Volkov, which I still think is a good fight. You know what I would like? I don't think these two have fought yet, but for Oleinik next, has he fought Derek Lewis? He has not. I would like to see that fight just because they're basically the same. Let me preface everything I'm about to say with this. But Derek Lewis is, swanging and banging on the feet. Alexei Oleinik is kind of the Derek Lewis of the grappling department. And it's not to say that neither of them have skills in other areas. Neither of them is a one-trick pony necessarily, but they both know where their bread is buttered. And seeing the two very, very opposite kind of skill sets like that, and two guys who lean so heavily on it, I think it would be an interesting fight.
That fight could work.
I mean, it might suck horribly, but
Overeem versus Lewis could work too. I don't think they fought, have they?
I believe they have not.
That could be a decent fight. It just depends what they want to do with Lewis next. I like the Volkov matchup if that's the way they go. Overeem seems to be okay. I mean, Volkov is still technically ranked above him, so that works. I guess that works for him. Yeah, so there's a few matchups you could do. And the other issue is Kane. Do you think Kane ever fights again?
I don't know at this point. I mean, I know he's doing some of the stuff with AAA, the professional wrestling promotion in Mexico.
Like, is he actually going to wrestle, or what is he doing?
I'm not sure. I saw the press release. He announced some kind of association with them. I don't know if he's just training down there or if it's just
what does that mean?
Some kind of, I don't know. I saw the announcement.
This is going to appear. This is from Pro Wrestling Sheet. He'll appear at Triple Mania. What's the extent of that?
I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. I think he's kind of dipping his toe in the professional wrestling world and seeing how things potentially.
I don't see him getting far in professional wrestling, but I don't
see him getting far. I don't see him getting far in WWE, but he might be just fine in a more lucha heavy style like AAA.
But he's not like he doesn't. I mean, he's an MMA fighter.
Yes.
Collegiate wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see him. I don't see it translating.
I mean, it translated for Brock. Translated for Dan Severn.
But Brock was a big, heavy power dude.
Yeah, and Brock, I mean, again,
Dan Severn's wrestling career was nothing to write home about. I'm sorry.
All right.
It depends on. I don't know. I just don't see it with Kane, but we'll see.
I mean, weirder people have taken off if you just find the right connection with the audience.
King Mo didn't. Rampage didn't, and they seem to have personalities that were tailor-made for pro wrestling.
I don't think either of them wanted to be in a non-competitive arena. I think they both, when they kind of got into that atmosphere, just realized that, you know what, I mean, okay. Rampage wanted to be fat.
Well, look, when Rousey signed with WWE, we knew she was going to be wrestling for WWE. We don't know what Kane's doing, so that troubles me.
I mean, again, we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if he fights again, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he gets some better offer. I mean, the man's older, and he has a lot of wear and tear on his body, and he just got pretty violently knocked out.
Maybe Olenek. Maybe he can fight Marcin Tybura or Tai Tuivasa. Justin Willis. Any one of those guys, I think, would be a decent matchup.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think you're right. Olenek at this point is just kind of a higher level gatekeeper, but you need guys like that around, and that's not the worst position to occupy.
Considering heavyweight.
True.
At least this one ended in the first round.
Yeah. I was grateful for that. All right, in your fight of the night, Islam Makhachev defeated Arman Sarukian via unanimous decision, 30-27 twice, 129-28. Sarukian came to fight, man. I'm pretty high on Makhachev, generally speaking. I mean, there's still some things he has to iron out and whatnot, but I'm a fairly significant appreciator of his skill set, and
they seem to be bringing Makhachev along slowly too.
Yeah, they're not rushing him, that's for sure.
I mean, he's definitely a prospect, but they basically gave him a tomato can to fight in Russia.
Yeah, well, that was the thought process, and again, Sarukian absolutely came to fight. If you like wrestling, and I mean, when I say that, I don't mean just takedowns, I mean the actual act of wrestling, of not conceding a position, of hitting switches, of looking for scrambles and reversals and sweeps. These two had a fabulous kind of wrestling match with punches. Makhachev is now 5 in a row, I think.
Yep. And 6-1. Yep, you're correct.
Overall in the UFC. And
Khabib was there to watch him.
He and Khabib are teammates.
Right.
And not just teammates. Like I think Makhachev is like one of the guys that his father basically was raised with them, because
maybe they'll fight each other someday.
It's not out of the question.
I mean, if Makhachev remains consistent, and once he starts getting the higher level opposition, continues looking this good, we'll see.
He said he wants to fight someone in the top 15. I agree with him. I think It's lightweight. You get to 5 in a row, you should be fighting someone of that caliber.
I agree. So let's see.
I mean, lightweight is
Oliveira, maybe.
Charles or Cowboy?
Charles Oliveira.
They scheduled Charles Oliveira for a third fight with Nick Lentz.
Maybe the winner of that fight would be a good idea.
Yeah, you could do the winner of that. James Vick is hanging out in there somewhere.
Gregor, I don't know. Gregor or Gillespie, probably not yet. Alexander Hernandez, maybe.
You could do Hernandez. Hernandez or Vick. No,
yeah.
I agree. I wouldn't go with Gillespie just yet.
Yeah. Yeah, there is some very interesting fights going forward for Makhachev. He looks dangerous. I'm not gonna anoint him as the next Habib or anything, but he's cut from a similar cloth, you know?
Yeah, he very clearly is. And again, I forget which fight of his it was that kind of made me a believer in his abilities. It wasn't the T-Bow fight, because I remember picking him to win that fight. It might have been the Lentz fight.
I think it was for me it was T-Bow.
Because I know for a lot of people that quick knockout of T-Bow, and that was a pretty bad knockout. I think for me it was the Lentz fight, the way he just kind of consistently out-scrambled and out-grappled Lentz in that fight.
You know, T-Bow was never like an elite world beater, but he was one of the more battle-tested veterans.
He was the kind of speed bump that turned back a lot of opposition.
Right. You know.
All right. You know what? I don't think there's anything else on this card worth going into too much detail over. So
you're right.
I'll give you your quick hits after this. Sergey Pavlovich defeated Marcelo Golm via knockout in the first round. At least it ended quickly. I don't know how to feel about Pavlovich. I watched him steamroll a bunch of guys in like M1. And in fairness, his UFC debut was against Overeem, and that was just a bit much. But even here, I mean, it's heavyweight, so who knows? But there's some pretty serious refinements that need to be made to his game. Roxanne Modafferi defeated Antonina Shevchenko via split decision. There were two 29-28s for her, one 29-28 for Shevchenko. I think 29-28 for either woman is justified. I think you could score it that way. Not a bad little fight, but hopefully Antonina learns that... God. I do have something very briefly to say about this. At distance, Antonina was doing very well. She was chewing up Roxanne Modafferi. Modafferi at distance has never been all that great. But Roxanne Modafferi has a really good ability to, if she can find an area of the game where she has an advantage, at kind of forcing that. And in this instance, a lot of her success came when she not only had the clinch, but very specifically had Shevchenko's back on the cage. And Shevchenko was not at all diligent enough or urgent enough about reversing that position. Because, I mean, Antonina can fight in the clinch. She tears people up from there. And she did a pretty serious number on Roxy's midsection with knees at various points. But just positionally, she was never quite as diligent as she needed to be about, okay, my back's on the cage. This is the one area of this fight so far that my opponent's having a lot of success. I really need to not be here anymore. And I don't know if that was just a technical failing on her end where she knew she needed to but just couldn't, or if it was a mentality thing where it's like, okay, I don't mind being in the clinch because I can fight here. And Roxanne was just able to constantly force takedowns and, again, enough to win on points. So hopefully she learns from it. Again, not a bad fight. Krzysztof Yatko defeated Alan Amedovski via unanimous decision, 30-25, 30-26, and 30-26. This was a total blowout. I think I was 30-25 for Yatko. Amedovski just was not ready for that level of opposition. Mosar, I heard them pronounce this. I'm going to get it right. Evloev. Or Eloev. God, I heard it pronounced. I knew how to do it, and I forgot. My apologies. But Evloev defeated Seungwoo Choi via unanimous decision, two 29-27s, one 29-26. Evloev got a point deduction in the first round for an illegal knee. And guys, look, I know commentary can barely keep these things straight for some reason. This bugged me more than anything. Like, know which rule set that the fights are taking place under, especially if you're on commentary and you have to communicate this to the audience, and know the differences. Because as soon as this knee landed, John Gooden, who did a solid job all night, but he repeated the line from the older rule set, which is anything other than the soles of your feet on the ground means you're downed. We were under the new rules last night, which means you need either both palms or fists flat on the mat to be considered downed, or, of course, a knee or kind of on your seat. There was a knee down when Evloev landed this illegal knee, led to the point deduction. I was fine with it. I, frankly, would be more in favor of point deductions for all illegal blows, all things considered. But Evloev usually fights at bantamweight, apparently. This was not his only fight at featherweight, but he's normally down at 135. And he looked a little outsized. Some of that's because Choi's a very big man, especially for featherweight. So I'd be curious to see Evloev at bantamweight, but he's a little buzzsaw. So I'm curious to see what he does going forward. Sultan Aliyev defeated Keita Nakamura via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards, and then retired from MMA. Aliyev's never been a world beater or anything, and if he's done, then, he's 34, man. And 34 at welterweight's on the older side of things. So he got to have a win in his home country, because I believe he's Russian. Yeah, he's Russian. So, good for him if he wants to kind of just be done and move on from the sport. He had some decent fights in the UFC, so, yeah, again, good on him. Alexander Yakovlev defeated Alex De Silva with a... I don't know what this was. I don't know if it was an anaconda neck crank. I don't know if it was an anaconda choke. It wasn't a straight anaconda choke. I don't know if it was a front choke with the arm in. I don't know if it was just a really, really cinched up front headlock from a wrestling perspective. I just don't know what this was. It bothers me because I've seen a few different kind of angles on it. I've seen a few other things that people are likening it to, and it is kind of just a traditional wrestling front headlock that he just cinched up and then angled a little bit differently to actually put his opponent into a submission position. Decent enough performance from Yakovlev, but I don't know. I know he's a little bit on the weaker side at welterweight right now, and if he wanted to make that move, he'd need to bulk up, but he seems like whatever cut he does to get to 155 is not especially healthy. Shamil Abdurakhimov defeated Marcin Tybura via TKO in the second round. Abdurakhimov, again, not really, top 5 guy in the world, but he's only lost twice in the UFC, and he's a solid enough kind of gatekeeper. Michael Oleksiejczuk defeated Gadzimurad Antigulov via knockout in the first round, 44 seconds into the first round. Guys, this is how you counterpunch against raw aggression. Just some really nice shot selection from Oleksiejczuk, some really nice footwork. Whenever Antigulov would try to bull rush on a straight line, watch his feet if you rewatch this fight, and it's a short one, so you should. He's never directly in front of him. He always takes an angle and then lands a counterpunch. So really nice stuff from Oleksiejczuk, who's undefeated in the UFC. I know the win over Khalil Roundtree got turned into a no contest, but he's knocked out both of his last opponents and might be someone to pay attention to at light heavyweight, given that light heavyweight needs all the help it can get. And kicking everything off, Magomed Mustafayev returned from a 2-year-plus layoff to land a spinning back kick to the face of Rafael Fiziev and then finish him on the ground. I was a little surprised this was the curtain jerker, considering Mustafayev's a pretty legitimate prospect. I mean, Mustafayev's only loss in the UFC is to Kevin Lee, and he's 15-2 overall. He's a pretty solid guy, but That was where my takeaways. For the record, your official fight of the night was Makhachev versus Sarukian, and your performances of the night went to Pavlovich and Mustafayev. So, for whatever value you wish to assign those as a fan, I mean, again, the fighters, it's $50,000, so I know what value they assign to it. Jeff, so what were your burning desires? Anything stick out to you from this event?
Valar Margulis. All men must die.
Indeed.
I have a question, though.
Sure. Go for it.
Does losing to Roxanne Modafferi mean you are not UFC caliber?
No.
You sure?
I'm pretty sure about that.
Come on.
Don't get me wrong. Roxanne's got a really weird record.
Really weird is like the understatement of the century.
There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that she fought a lot when women didn't really have the same weight classes that were assigned. Like
Right.
They refer to her as a pioneer of women's MMA for a reason. She fought when it was women at, hey, you get to weigh in at 133.5, or it's whatever weight you showed up at, and women's fighting was not taken and treated seriously.
No, and 3-minute rounds, right?
Yeah, but she fought
but still
3-minute round fights. I'm
not sure.
I mean, she's also improved her skill set over the last couple of years. Like,
okay,
there was a period of time when I think that might have been a fair assessment.
Okay.
Like, if you look at her, like her run up to her first run in the UFC, I think, because she was on a previous season of the Ultimate Fighter.
I just feel her getting a paycheck is almost sort of like a sentimental deal at this point.
I mean, you're not entirely wrong necessarily, but I mean,
look, I have no problem with that because she's a very nice person. She has been a good ambassador to the sport, and I don't know, I'm just not sure she's a UFC caliber fighter.
I mean, again, if you look at, especially her big, losing streak that went on, if you look at some of the people she was fighting, and if you look at her skill set at the time, and, if you go earlier into her career, she was fighting at, 147, which is not at all her optimal weight. And, again, she's had a very weird career in some respects, but I think after because she was in a previous season of The Ultimate Fighter, she went to Invicta after that, and she had a really solid run. Actually, through that time.
And then Antonina, her whole career is going to be that she's Valentina's sister, just like Sergio.
At the moment, if she doesn't change a few things, then yes.
And look, Sergio's a veteran, and he's picked up a few UFC wins, but it can be to his detriment that your brother's a UFC champion.
Yeah, again, I think Sergio, again, does kind of benefit from the familial relationship. And, again, I'm curious to see what Antonina does, because if she wants to be something other than Valentina's sister, then, yeah, she is going to have to differentiate herself in some pretty real ways.
Those are my only burning desires.
All right. Moving on to Saturday. The UFC is on... this is just oddly kind of phrased and located as far as the platform. At the moment, I'm just going to call it UFC on ESPN Plus 8 because the main card is currently listed as being on ESPN.
But they're showing prelims on ESPN2 and ESPN.
Yes.
How did they work that out?
ESPN wanted the fights there.
I mean, it's their airtime, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, if they're doing that, they better not preempt them for some, nonsense.
It depends on what else is. A lot of the other major sporting events at the moment are kind of between. Yeah, we're not dealing with college.
It's MLB season right now. We're well underway.
Yeah, but that's not the same. They are contractually not allowed to preempt college basketball, especially depending on the team that's involved. Because
contracts are made to be broken, Robert.
Not if you don't want to get sued into the ground. So I don't know for sure, but again, it's listed right now as being on ESPN Plus.
Tell that to DirecTV after they leak the season 8 of Game of Thrones.
And I think HBO and the Game of Thrones showrunners should sue them into the ground.
Yeah. Well, that hasn't happened yet. That could be a developing situation. We'll
Just
see.
saying, if you can't come to some kind of agreement, then yeah, I would absolutely, if I was in their position, there would be some lawsuits coming their way for breach of contract.
I mean, it's not a terrible card. A good main event.
Yeah, the main event's gone through a few different changes because it began life as Paulo Costa versus Yoel Romero, which is a solid fight. It's two upper-level middleweights. You got a guy who, if it were not for Robert Whittaker, I think would be champion in Yoel Romero. Well, champion in some of his weight issues. Well, sorry, Whittaker and some of his weight issues. You've got Costa as the young up-and-coming guy that looks pretty good, especially as a young up-and-coming Brazilian guy who could kind of reinvigorate that market. And don't get me wrong, Costa has plenty of issues and habits in his game that I'm happy to discuss, but if we're just talking about positioning.
Romero had pneumonia.
Yeah, it started with Costa. Costa pulled out first. So they made the rematch between Jacare and Romero. Those two fought a few years ago. Romero won a split decision in not the most entertaining fight in the world, but I enjoyed it.
Well, there was at least there was unresolved issues there.
Again, it was a split decision, so you can. There's some cause for that, and then
yes,
and I was excited for that rematch. Those are two of the, say, 3 or 5 best. Yeah, they're two of the top 5 middleweights in the world, from where I sit.
Costa's this surging up-and-coming prospect. I think he's been needing a step up in competition like this, honestly.
Yeah, Costa had been, and then we wind up with Jacare and Romero, and then Romero gets pretty ill, which sucks. And that was relatively recently. That was just a couple of weeks ago that he had to pull out of that fight. And that leaves us with now Ronaldo Jacare Souza taking on, in fairness to his opposition, the definitely surging Jack Hermansson. Jack Hermansson has a really solid UFC record. He's 6-2?
6-2. Finished his last 3 fights, including submitting David Branch, Talis Latis, and Gerald knocked out Talis Latis, submitted Gerald Mearchart. Only losses are to Cesar Ferreira and Thiago Santos, who's fighting John Jones coming up this summer for the light heavyweight title. So, solid record, all things.
Yeah, he has a really solid resume, and I mean,
and he's gotten better.
He's definitely been improving, and he took no damage in that David Branch win. And he's stepping up to fight Jacare, and much as the circumstances surrounding this fight are less than ideal, I'm okay with this fight. I mean, Jacare's on a bit of a research. I mean, Jacare, it's so weird because he's been around forever. His age is listed as 39, and I do think he might be a little bit older than that. He's, an absolutely superb fighter who, for various reasons, some of which were a key loss here or there, and some of which were the politics of fighting or an injury at the wrong time, has never fought for the UFC title, which is I maintain that's a crying shame. As when Bisping won the belt, my immediate thought was, okay, Jacare's the number 1 contender. They're going to make that fight, and Jacare's going to beat him because Jacare's a better fighter. And then it just never materialized because of reasons. In the interim, Jacare got knocked out by Whittaker, who would go on to actually, become the best middleweight in the world. And at the moment, he's coming off that win over Weidman, which was a good fight and a really good win. But he hasn't won back-to-back fights in the UFC since 2017. And again, at his age, if he's and not just his age, but his miles. This is a guy with 30 some odd professional fights and multiple years of jiu-jitsu competition at the highest level. If he's going to make a run, he's got to, get going. And he's taking on a dangerous guy. Jack Hermansson's an odd fighter. He's got a very awkward rhythm to him. He bounces a lot. He's got very good throws from the clinch, especially if he gets a body lock on you. He's got some pretty serious ground and pound, and he's got a really interesting his style of passing. I don't know enough to know this particulars of the differences between like why his passing style, and I think Gunnar Nelson has kind of the same thing in terms of his just style of passing. That just looks and feels a little bit different from a lot of the more kind of just straight up and down traditional guard passers. Even some of the really great ones. I mean, look at Gunnar Nelson's guard passing, and then look at like Rafael dos Anjos' guard passing, and they don't look the same. And I don't know enough about what the difference is, but Jack Hermansson has some of that same kind of Gunnar Nelson style of guard pass. And it lets him move into very dominant positions very quickly. Now, I don't know the degree to which he's going to want to spend a lot of time grappling with Jacare, because Jacare's grappling is still kind of his bread and butter. But it does present some interesting challenges, especially if Jacare gets on bottom, to kind of deal with the passing that Hermansson presents. On the feet, again, Jacare is a bit more traditional, and Hermansson's a bit more awkward. And those are usually clashes that kind of come down to who understands what they're doing better. You get a really solid traditionalist against a less solid, unorthodox kind of guy, then the one who's more fundamentally solid wins. By contrast, if you have someone who can't really think outside the box or adjust to kind of the unexpected, then then some of the more awkward fighters can find some success against them. I'm leaning towards Jacare here just because it takes a pretty significant set of circumstances for me to pick against Jacare. And I don't think Hermansson presents them. But I wouldn't sleep on Hermansson either. Again, he presents some interesting problems for Jacare depending on the distance that the fight is contested at. Again, especially if they get into prolonged clinch exchanges. I think if Hermansson gets one of those body lock takedowns into a dominant position like side control, Jacare might find himself in awkward spots that Hermansson can take advantage of. So Hermansson has paths to victory, but I don't pick against Jacare all that often, and I don't see a compelling reason to pick against him here, and I kind of need that at this point. Jeff, you are a more vocal supporter of Jacare even than I am, so is he going to pull this one out here and then continue to get snubbed for a title shot, or is...
I think he will continually get snubbed for a title shot because it is Jacare we're talking about. I think he wins this fight. I think this is a tough and dangerous fight for him. I think it's a good way to kind of gauge where Jack Hermansson is right now and see how good he can really be. It's a decent step up in competition, but it is a very, very dangerous fight, but it's also one Jacare needs to win so he can pick up another win and hopefully stay in the title conversation. It's a very risky fight. I don't really love it, but as a main event, considering we lost Costa versus Romero, that was a much more relevant, sensical main event. I guess this is as good as we can get right now, so we'll see. But I'm going with Jacare by submission. Hermansson does seem to have a good, well-rounded skill set, but I think history has proven that Jacare's skills are on another level, even as he's kind of entering this more advanced age. He's very dangerous, standing and on the ground, and I kind of never feel like he's gotten the due he was deserved in the UFC. I feel like he had earned his title shot really before when Luke Rockhold. I think he should have gotten the nod over Luke Rockhold, and that was how many years ago? Like
A few.
So that was back in, I think, 2015. When did Rockhold win the belt? It was late 2015, right?
I think so.
Yeah, so I think that's when he should have gotten his title shot. But whatever. Here we are, picking Jacare.
All right, your co-main event, and this fight is only in the co-main event because of ESPN. I would bet money on this. That the executives at ESPN want one of the principals in this next fight to be featured prominently, and that's why he's in this spot. But Greg Hardy, this, I mean, look, I don't think Greg Hardy is the worst fighter on the UFC roster, but he's probably close. And he's coming off of that disqualification loss in his UFC debut when, like so many other fighters, and bear in mind this criticism is not limited to him, but there's a lot of fighters who are used to just hitting their opponent with one punch and their opponent goes away. And then the first time they come against someone who, oh, I hit you, and okay, you come, all right, good shot, but I'm still here and we're going to keep fighting. They just don't know what to do. I think Greg Hardy had a lot of that in his last fight. But he is here in the co-main event, and he is fighting Dmitry Smoliakov. The UFC is going out of their way to give this guy winnable fights. Smoliakov is 1-2 in the UFC, with losses to Luis Enrique and Cyril Asker. I'm not trying to throw Cyril Asker under the bus here, but really, if you're losing to this guy at heavyweight, he only has 2 wins at heavyweight in the UFC. That is Dmitry Smoliakov and Hyung-Soo Hu, who should not be in the UFC. I mean, they're giving him about as another soft touch, and I'm watch Greg Hardy go to another DQ because instead of an illegal knee this time, it'll be just a straight up, nut shot, and Smoliakov won't be able to continue.
Smoliakov's going to win this fight, Robert.
I mean, I don't think it's entirely possible that he does. Isn't his nickname the Lifeguard?
Greg Hardy curse is going to strike again. Greg Hardy, UFC champion, is not going to be a thing, Robert. It's not going to happen.
Smoliakov's nickname is the Lifeguard. I can't believe I remembered that.
Well,
oh God,
this is going to be part of the life force of MMA from Greg Hardy next weekend. How do you like that?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Smoliakov has never won in the UFC. My apologies. He went 0-2 and was cut. He's coming back to the UFC for this fight. Oh, God. Could you be more transparent in your matchmaking, UFC, please? Oh, God.
He still has a lot more fights than
he does.
Greg Hardy. And he's still going to win, so it's really irrelevant at this point.
He's going to get his first win. I'm predicting Greg Hardy tries an inside leg kick, kicks him in the balls, and Smoliakov can't continue. So we get another DQ/no contest on the career of Greg Hardy. Just because I'm not sure Smoliakov is good enough to actually win the fight on his own merits, but Greg Hardy is definitely bad enough to lose it. Your next fight down is a good fight for those of us who like violence, and I do. But Alex Cowboy Oliveira, a relatively dirty fighter, coming off of that loss to Gunnar Nelson. He is fighting Mike Platinum Perry, who is coming off of a loss to Donald Cerrone. I mean, Perry's only 1-3 in his last 4. And that win was a split decision over Paul Felder, who's a lightweight, not a welterweight at this moment in time. These two are going to beat the crap out of each other. These are two guys who like to get after it. They both got power. If Oliveira is smart, he works for the grap. He works for some takedowns because Perry on the ground is iffy. But I expect knees, I expect elbows, I expect leather and blood and guts, and one of these two gentlemen unconscious at the end of it. You know what? I'm going to pick Perry. I don't know, man. Something about the way Oliveira just kind of cheated repeatedly against Nelson didn't sit right with me. So I'm going with Perry here, but I expect these two to get after it. This could very easily be your fight of the night. So, Jeff, again, we have the Cowboy and we have Platinum. Is Mike Perry going to go 0-2 against people nicknamed Cowboy here?
Yeah. I like Perry and I want him to win, but he does not have a very high fight IQ, Robert. And his poor ground skills have bit him in the rear in the past. And I think Oliveira probably edges him out here and is going to get a submission.
All right. We have a couple of the old man club, and I mean that with all due respect, but we have Jacare Souza. We also have Glover Teixeira, who is himself 39 years old and out there doing it for the old men. He tapped Carl Robertson. He got kind of lit up in that fight a little bit before he got the takedown. He is fighting Iwan Kutelaba, who is coming off of that win over Antigulov. He had a fight scheduled between now and then. Yeah, it was Teixeira, actually. They rescheduled this bout. They were supposed to fight in January. Okay. I mean, Teixeira is the more skilled fighter, all things considered, but Kutelaba packs both power and the requisite insanity. He's one of those scarier guys. Like, he turns on the crazy eyes when he looks at you, and you know what? That guy... That's the kind of guy that'll kill you in a back alley. I'm still leaning towards Teixeira, but Teixeira's been hit. He's been finished, and if he's not, kind of mindful of a few of his entries, then I think Kutelaba can definitely catch him. So, but yeah, I'm going with Glover, all things considered. Jeff, what do you got here? What is Kutelaba's nickname? It's the Hulk of some variety. Just the Hulk, okay.
I like Glover Teixeira here, even though he is kind of getting up there. Kutelaba, I mean, he's okay, but he's not done anything yet that makes me feel he's able to win this type of fight against this type of opponent. I feel like for Kutelaba, he doesn't have anything Teixeira hasn't seen before, and he's not the level of opposition that's able to beat Glover Teixeira. But I could be wrong. We'll see. But I'm picking Teixeira.
Okay, next up, I'm really looking forward to this fight, actually. This was scheduled previously, and then it fell apart after some kind of issue with Lineker. But John Lineker and Corey Sandhagen are going to battle. This is a very relevant fight for bantamweight. For some reason, Corey Sandhagen is still unranked, which is kind of bizarre to me. But John Lineker... again, a really, really good bantamweight. His recent record, his UFC record he's lost 3 times total in the UFC, and only once at bantamweight. That was to TJ Dillashaw. He knocked out Brian Kelleher, and Corey Sandhagen is. I'm looking at him pretty heavily because he's done some really impressive stuff. He's got a really good feel for kind of movement in the Dominic Cruz style. He's a tough guy. I mean, the arm bar that Yuri Alcantara had him in their fight was just horrific, and he didn't tap. And not only did he not tap, he came back and stopped Yuri in the second round. He does a lot of really scrambly, heavy grappling offense. That's where he caught Mario Batista with the armbar. This is a big step up in competition for him, and I'm struggling here because I think if Sandhagen's at his best, he can win this fight. But I'm not sure that he's currently at a level that he's going to be able to consistently to demonstrate the consistency necessary to deal with John Lineker for 3 rounds. So I'm picking Lineker here, but this is probably the fight on the card I'm most looking forward to personally. So, Jeff, am I out of my mind in giving Sandhagen, that much credit here?
Are you picking? So just to make it clear, you're picking Sandhagen?
No, I'm picking Lineker. But I'm let me put it like this: I'm not going to be surprised if Sandhagen has found some exploitable holes.
I think this is Lineker's fight to lose. Quite frankly, I think Lineker. This is the type of fights Lineker loses. I don't think this is one of them. Because look, for all of his UFC issues, who is Lineker lost to in the UFC? So
TJ most recently, right. Louis Gaudinot way back in his UFC debut, and Ali Bagutinov.
That was just under 7 years ago, and Ali Bagutinov. Now, what do we know about Bagutinov? Doper. TJ Dillashaw. I think we can unequivocally say at this point Dillashaw was guilty, and this was not a witch hunt by USADA. I think you would agree at this point, correct?
Yeah, I don't think they're perpetrating some kind of witch hunt against TJ Dillashaw. I think he got popped.
Well, you were putting it out there that he was like, it could have been naturally occurring.
I questioned that. I mean, there were two things that went on with that. One is I was curious about whether or not, about the rates of potential false positives for EPO testing generally, because the effects of EPO, and this doesn't necessarily mean the chemical effects, but the practical effects of EPO can be mimicked through purely technological means rather than chemical. And I was curious as to how that came out. Again, is EPO one of those substances that shouldn't be on the banned list? No, and let me be clear, I'm okay with EPO being banned. I know why it's banned. Fair enough. It's okay. I'm okay with that being there. There's other substances that USADA has banned that I think should not be on that list. EPO is not one of those. I'm okay with it being banned. They tested a previous sample of TJ's that also came back positive, and he came out and admitted to it. So I'm not going to get on. I'm not going to. Right, well, I'm not anti-USADA.
Going back to Lineker, my point is, I mean, now all three of Lineker's losses in the UFC were to fighters who had some sort of drug testing issue. So, just saying.
Yeah, same with Cody Garbrandt,
and many of Michael Bisping's losses. So I think Lineker has proven, if he's not an elite level, he's at least a very high level top 10 contender. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, he's in the top 10 now, and I think that's deserved.
Probably close to being the top 5 outside of his weight cutting issues.
I think officially he's number 8. Yeah, he's number 8 now.
That's probably fair. I mean, I guess you can make the argument, even though TJ didn't fail any drug tests for that fight, what if TJ was doping that far back and they just didn't catch it?
Yeah, how much reasonable paranoia are we going to inject into this?
I think it's a valid argument. Don't you agree? How is that not?
And if John Lineker fails a drug test for this fight, how far back has he been doping then?
Well, has he ever had a drug test failure?
I'm not sure, actually. Hang on.
Might have. He's had like 5 fights where he's missed weight.
No, he's missed weight a lot, but I don't think he's...
Look, guys who haven't failed tests could be doping on something, and we just don't know. The Dillashaw thing is a good example because before this, Dillashaw never had any sort of hiccups, Lineker is fast, great footwork. I think he's a fairly good movement, good striking. I think Corey Sandhagen is a tough fight and a dangerous fight, but I think Lineker is going to edge it out. So it's a tough fight. Don't get me wrong. And Sandhagen he's ever since he came into the UFC, he's been looking good. He has 3 straight finishes. And look, Yuri Alcantara, he's not a world beater, but he is a tough opponent. You can't deny that.
Yeah, and Alcantara was, I believe, ranked at the time. I'd have to double check that.
That was in 2018. He might have. I'm not sure. Is Alcantara still in the UFC?
I think so.
He might be, but he hasn't fought since that loss to Sandhagen.
Yeah. All right, and kicking off the main card, this is another fight that's in an odd spot considering some of the other fighters on this card.
There are a few good fights on this card.
No, there are. Again, this is a pretty solid card. Roosevelt Roberts, who was most famous for he's from the Contender Series. He did win his UFC debut. Okay. And he beat Daryl Horcher. I mean, I'm not trying to crap on Daryl Horcher or anything, but so he's got 1 win in the UFC, 7-0 overall, and his opponent is Thomas Gifford, who is 17-7, and I believe making his UFC debut. Unless he fought there earlier. Yeah, this is his first UFC fight. The UFC kind of seems to like Roberts. He was one of those guys from the Contender Series that Dana got pretty high on. So I expect him to.
They're trying to give him a win.
Yeah, they're matching him up favorably, and in fairness to that policy at the moment, he's 7-0. Like, I'm not calling for him to be thrown into the deep end necessarily. So it makes sense to be a little bit more judicious.
No, I agree. When you have like a prospect who's a little less experienced, you want to, you don't want to throw him into the deep end right away. I agree.
That said, I do like Roberts here.
They're taking the same approach with Johnny Walker, and Walker, he's a little more experienced, isn't he?
Yeah, a little.
He's been doing fairly well.
And in a much worse division.
Right? But Walker Johnny DeSouza, I know how you are about using Brazilian fighters' real name.
For the purposes of conversation, Johnny Walker's fine.
All right. Well, Johnny Walker, they're bringing him along slowly, and he's 17-3, and he beat Misha Cirkunov. So,
yeah, and again, he's in a division that desperately needs that kind of talent. Whereas lightweight, right, if Roberts doesn't pan out, there's 18 other guys, 9 of whom you've never heard of and are on the regional scene that can step in.
So. Yeah, I'm picking Roberts here.
Yeah, I agree.
Seems to be a safe pick, but we'll see.
All right, as for the prelims, I'm not sure how finalized the bout order here is.
Oh my God, Andrei Arlovsky.
Yes.
Man.
We have Ben Font.
You know what? We got to give it up for Arlovsky because the man's he keeps going at it.
And persistence counts for a lot.
Despite having look at this record.
27-18.
No, but I mean, just in his last, how many UFC? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He's like 2. Robert, he's like 2-7, I think, in his last.
He's 2-7 with 1 no contest in his last fights.
Come on.
Hey.
That's crazy.
Walt Harris only won that fight because he was doping.
But come on now.
Now, your main event at the prelims is Ben Saunders versus Takashi Sato. Sato, I believe this is his UFC debut.
He's 40. Should he really still be fighting?
Who,
it's a lot. Yeah.
Arlovsky? I mean, should he be?
Even at heavyweight.
I mean, probably not, but
I'm not going to tell. This is not my decision, but man, it seems suspect.
At a minimum, he needs to be planning his exit strategy.
And I mean, you know how I feel about BJ Penn in his last like pretty much every UFC fight he's had.
For the last 5 years.
Even longer than that, I think, since I guess the John Fitch fight. And that's quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, everything after the Fitch fight, yeah, I'd agree. Anyway, Sato, this is his UFC debut. He's done a lot of stuff in Pancrase. He's fighting Ben Saunders. Ben Saunders is he's pretty close to washed. He's 1-4 in his last 5, and it was a win over Jake Ellenberger.
Yes, I think what keeps him around is mainly he has fun fights, and he does have quite a history with the UFC as well.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I am struggling to find a reason to pick Ben Saunders, so I'll pick Sato, and I'm prepared to look stupid. Andrei Arlovsky, the aforementioned, will be fighting Augusto Sakai.
Let me say this. If Saunders can't beat Sato, he really should probably pack it up and call it a career.
At least he shouldn't be in the UFC.
At the very least, yeah.
Sakai is 1-0 in the UFC. He defeated Chase Sherman. I don't remember that fight. I covered that fight, and I genuinely don't remember it.
I don't think it was a good fight.
He's on a 3-fight winning streak. So he's 12-1-1. He does have a draw. I'll lean towards I almost said I'm leaning towards Arlovsky. That's how crappy this fight is.
I can't in good conscience.
I can't pick Arlovsky. I literally cannot.
And I like Arlovsky.
To do it.
And I like Arlovsky, but man, come on.
I mean, this is the kind of fight that he tends to win under these circumstances.
His last 2 wins, those were not good fights, Robert. Those were like, what I remember that fight with Junior Albini was, I remember it was bowling shoe ugly, to steal a phrase from Jim Ross.
It was, and then somehow the fight with Stefan Struve managed to be even less engaging.
Right, so
I'll go with Sakai, but I'm not gonna. At this point, it's heavyweight. I shouldn't be surprised, pretty much regardless of what happens.
Like Arlovsky had that amazing win against Travis Brown, and that was like the peak of his comeback, really.
Yeah. All right. We also have Carla Esparza was supposed to fight Jessica Penne. Penne did something to her ankle. I think she's posted photos of it. It swole up pretty badly. So now she will fight the undefeated Vima. I'm going to butcher this woman's last name. Jandiroba. She's from Brazil, so Jan. So yeah, I'm going with Jandiroba until I hear otherwise. She is 14-0. This is her UFC debut. She's 3-0 in Invicta.
So it'll be Hill versus Escobar? No, wait.
Sorry, no. Oh, sorry, my mistake. Penne was supposed to fight Escobar. No, Esparza versus, I believe this was always Esparza's fight. No, she was supposed to fight Livia Souza. And she was supposed to fight Livia Renata Souza, but Souza had to pull out of that fight. I don't know. I struggle to pick Esparza at this point, just kind of generally. So I won't. I'll go with Vima, and I'll be wrong if I'm wrong. Gilbert Burns will fight Mike Davis. Nice to see Dorino. Gilbert Burns is one of those guys I kind of like watching fight. Burns is he beat Olivier Aubin-Mercier.
Wait, the website is still listing Penne versus Escobar, though. I guess that's how they feel about that fight.
The UFC is terrible about updating their website. I mean, up until like an hour before the event on Saturday, they still listed that Devin Clark versus Ivan Shatirikov after that fight had been canceled. They are terrible about their website. They are just terrible. I
mean, the website to me is the first thing you should be updating.
Hey, but we only make sense. Anyway, Burns is fighting.
Wait, so wait, is it Hill versus Escobar or not?
It is. No, it's Hill versus Escobar.
Okay, I thought it was okay.
It was supposed to be, I believe, Escobar versus Penne before Penne got injured.
Okay.
Anyway,
I'm picking Escobar.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Anyway, we have Mike Davis probably going to lose here. This is his UFC debut. He lost to Sodiq Yusuff on the Dana's Contender Series. But yeah, it's Gilbert Burns, man. Gilbert Burns is a really, really solid fighter. Jim Miller will fight Jason Gonzalez. Gonzalez has fought in the UFC before, I want to say. Yeah, a few times. He's 1-2. He lost to Drew Dober, beat J.C. Cottrell, lost to Gregor Gillespie. This is the kind of fight Jim Miller really needs to win if he wants to kind of stick around, because he is 1-5 in his last 4. And now, in fairness to Jim Miller, those losses are in order: Dustin Poirier, Anthony Pettis, Francisco Trinaldo, Dan Hooker, and then Charles Oliveira. So that's some pretty stiff level of opposition. But again, this is the kind of fight that if he wants to stick around in the UFC, he absolutely has to win. And for sentimental reasons, I'll pick Miller.
Miller's a sentimental favorite for me, and I am going to go ahead and pick him for this fight, but people have been cut with more impressive records than this.
Indeed.
And look, I'm not saying he should be cut, but I mean, at this point, he's lucky he's still on the roster and on payroll, all things considered.
I'd agree with that.
I mean, just for example, Paul Sass, who was, I think, a promising fighter, who got cut after like 1 loss, I think.
Something like that.
It was in a tough fight. So, I mean, because look, he went 4 in a row, won 1 fight against Alex White, and then lost and look, lightweight is very tough. It's very competitive, but he just hasn't been able to put it together recently.
No, and again, this is a guy with a lot of years, a lot of miles, a lot of great fights. I mean, Jim Miller's been part of some of my favorite fights to just rewatch because I can. But he's nearing the end. And if he loses to Jason Gonzalez, that's kind of like, for me, that would be the final nail in his UFC run, if nothing else.
Yeah, so I feel like he should be fighting for his job with this fight at the very least. And I like Jim Miller a lot.
Ditto.
I wouldn't. There were multiple times I would not have been opposed to him getting a title shot, but that time has passed.
Yeah, again, I agree with you. There was that time. That time was also like 6 years ago.
Really longer than 6 years ago, I think. A lot longer.
When was Edgar champion?
2011. He lost the belt in 2012, Robert. To Ben Henderson.
So 7 years.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, credit to Miller. The man's been in the UFC for like 11, 12 years.
Yep.
I mean, he's been there for a long time.
And one of in the bloodiest division in MMA.
Yeah, and he was remarkably consistent.
But you want to know what? I would pick him to beat Conor McGregor if they fought tomorrow.
I would absolutely not.
Just because.
I mean, I appreciate the sentiment, but no. I mean, again, I appreciate throwing shade at Conor and annoying the cult of Conor, but no, I think he'd probably sleep Jim Miller. That's fine. Man, again, we have the guys
who are still fighting in the UFC. Court McGee is still there.
Yeah, again, we have the aforementioned Hill and Escobar fight. Then we have Court McGee and Diego Lima. I feel like these two are both fighting for their jobs here, and I like Court McGee. In fairness, Court
McGee's coming off a win.
Yeah, he beat Alex Garcia. I thought he beat Ben Saunders, quite frankly, in their fight. I did not agree with that decision.
McGee's had a couple, I think, iffy decisions in his career.
And in fairness,
I think the Nick Ring fight, the one in Canada, I believe he definitely won that fight.
Oh yeah, and in fairness, I thought he lost the Robert Whittaker fight because they fought at welterweight a few years ago.
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, I like Court McGee. And again,
that Nick Ring fight, come on.
I agree. He should have won that fight.
Nick Ring was horrible in the UFC.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason he didn't amount to anything. I mean, Court McGee, that was his only. I mean, he had a couple of early wins over guys who shouldn't be in the UFC, like Ricky Fukuda and James Head. Man, even the Fukuda fight, I recall being a little bit iffy as far as like that maybe shouldn't have gone his way. Yeah, he's fighting Diego Lima, who just barely got his first win in the UFC when he beat Chad Laprise. Now, in fairness, that was a pretty sweet knockout. But he broke a 3-fight losing streak with that, and he's just 3-3 in his last 6. And again, that was his second win ever in the UFC. The other being a unanimous decision over Jorge de Oliveira in 2014, where he got a gimme fight. And then, I mean, he was knocked out by Eddie Gordon before that, and then after that he was knocked out by Tim Means and Li Jing Liang, and then he comes back and loses to Jesse Taylor. Lost to Yushin Okami in 2018. I'm going with McGee, but again, I have a sentimental attachment to Court, so. But I feel like the loser of that fight is definitely going away. But if you look at the amount of canceled or fizzled bouts from this fight card, you have Romero versus Costa that fell apart, Penne versus Escobar that fell apart, Esparza versus Souza that fell apart, Romero versus Souza that fell apart, Alex Oliveira and Li Jing Liang fell apart. It was supposed to be Oliveira and Li Jing Liang, and Mike Perry stepped in. Perry was already on the card against Ben Saunders. When that fight again, Saunders is still on the card, obviously, but that got switched around. Gilbert Burns was supposed to fight Eric Wisely. Eric Wisely was just not medically cleared. And again, the aforementioned Souza versus Costa. So this fight card's had some setbacks. But again, I'm kind of looking forward to the card. It's got some decent fights on it. Again, the main event's good. Lineker versus Sandhagen's good. Oliveira and Perry's going to be a violence fest. And I'm always down for a Jim Miller fight. So I'm not complaining about a whole lot as it pertains to this card. I'm relatively optimistic. I won't say I have high expectations, but I am optimistic about it. And again, that will be Saturday, the 27th, and I will have coverage of that in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania. So stop by, say hello. Always appreciated. All right, that is it for fight previews. Let's jump into some news that broke a little bit earlier today. Darren Till's been arrested in the Canary Islands. He apparently stole a taxi and destroyed a hotel room, and he's just been arrested.
Allegedly.
This is the report. So,
was he on vacation? What was he doing?
I assume so. I mean, I'm not trying to knock the Canary Islands, but I believe that's more of a vacation or resort destination than.
Did he go on like a coke bender or something?
I'm not sure. I mean, I got a kick out of the picture they posted along with this. He does look a little. He's smiling. He's got the big kind of happy open mouth smile, and his eyes are all, glossy. Like, all right, you chose a photo to imply something, if nothing else.
Where's this photo? Where can I see this photo?
I don't know. I think the MMA. I think it's on MMA Mania. That might be the one that I saw. It's the one that I think I saw on Twitter too. So it's just, I can't. Again, this broke earlier today, so I'm not going to.
Oh, I see it now.
I'm not going to pass a lot of judgment here because we don't know the totality of circumstances.
It sounds bad.
Yeah, at the moment, it does not sound good. That's a pretty precipitous fall for a guy who was fighting for the belt not too long ago.
Maybe Conor McGregor bribed him to do this to take some of the heat off him.
There are worse conspiracy theories out there than that one. So there's not enough detail to talk too much about this, but that's not a good look, if nothing else. Let's see, what else did I kind of want to touch on? I'll move those around. A little bit. BJ Penn, in some sadder news, the sad decline of BJ Penn continues. He's now being accused, and again, these are accusations. Take them with however much salt you deem necessary. But someone is accused, some people local to BJ's area are accusing him of like destroying some fencing in their property and threatening them with a machete. And I mean, man, especially after what came out, again, I don't know the relationship. I don't know if it's wife, ex-wife, just romantic partner, whatever. After some of the allegations that were raised in the restraining order she took out against him.
But those are still allegations. He hasn't been.
Yeah,
was the restraining order granted?
Probably. It doesn't take a whole lot to grant a restraining order necessarily. That doesn't mean that there's criminal proceedings going on relative to that does not mean he's been charged with anything relative to those.
Penn sounds like he's a troubled individual. I hope he's going to be okay.
I agree. I mean, and that's kind of been the story on him for a while. And I said this, and again, I've never met BJ Penn under any circumstances. I didn't think he knew who he was if he wasn't fighting. And sometimes
I think it's like that for a lot of these guys. That's identity.
And that's not an uncommon thing, and that's not just limited to fighting, though fighting because of its shorter lifespan. I mean, you look at a lot of people when they change careers. I don't mean jobs. I mean, like, I've spent the last 13, 14 years of my life as a journalist, for example, right. And then, hey, not only does my newspaper close, but I can't get hired because there's a bunch of out-of-work journalists. What do I do now? That's not an uncommon sentiment. That right. Said, there's a lot of disturbing stuff kind of surrounding BJ at the moment that I'm with you. I hope he gets whatever help he needs.
I think it happens to a lot of pro athletes. They kind of burn out after they have to retire. And, and they're retiring decades before, other people in their own careers are retiring. So it's what do they do with themselves?
Well, and again, you also have to consider just how much we talk about, the lifespan of a professional athlete, say in the NFL, is measured in not years, but seasons. I think the average career in the NFL lasts like a season and a half. I'd have to double check that, so nobody quote me. But there's not a lot of longevity in the NFL. But that's something that you've been working for
your whole life.
Pretty much your whole life. I mean, I'll give you a pass when you're literally in diapers, but if you make it to the NFL, you've been playing football since you were 5, give or take.
Right.
And if you get to the UFC, these are guys that have dedicated a significant portion of their lives to the martial arts. You talk about, Lyoto Machida is an extreme example in that he was practicing karate when he was 3. But these are guys that start, wrestling when they're 5 or 6, or start jiu-jitsu when they're, early in their life. And this is a cult, so you get to this point and you're retiring based on competitive necessity or injuries or what have you, and you're not even 50. Your life is barely half over, and suddenly everything that you've done up to that point is kind of, I don't want to say irrelevant by any stretch of the imagination, but everything has to shift. And there's a lot of people that really struggle with that. And when you factor in the physical demands of any sort of sport, much less one with the kind of repetitive concussive impact of fighting or football or rugby, even sports that don't have that same level of, again, constant concussive impact, like basketball. There's a lot of guys who just really struggle with who they are outside of it. And BJ seems to be at the kind of the worst apex of that in terms of even if he were a completely healthy individual, he's not quite sure what he is and who he is if he's not fighting. And you factor in the head trauma that he's suffered, and he's suffered a fair bit of it. And it's kind of, whatever other personal issues he has, I'm not saying that, again, the allegations of him being a drug addict are true. I will say that wouldn't surprise me if they were true. And it's a potentially very ugly situation. I do sincerely hope he gets whatever help is necessary.
Moving on to more positive news, Rick Franklin will be inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame in the Pioneers wing this year. Robert, is this a valid induction, you think? Do you think there's merit for inducting Ace?
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit last week. Yeah, I have no issue with him going into the Hall of Fame. He was a very important figure in some respects. He had a very successful career. He was their champion for a significant period of time. I mean, for a long time, and up until he fought Anderson Silva, the only loss on his record was to Lyoto Machida. He was undefeated at middleweight for a long period of time. And then even after that fight, he was very competitive for a while, and then he closed out.
He did only have 2 title defenses as champion.
Yeah, sure, but he also had some high-profile, kind of lucrative fights that took place outside of being the champion.
Fight with Ken Shamrock.
Yeah.
The Liddell fight. You know.
Well, and he closed out his career being kind of the ultimate company man in terms of, okay, you have a spot on a card that needs to be filled, slot me in there. Yeah, I'll go to Singapore and fight Kung Lee. I'll fight Vanderlei Silva. I'll fight whoever.
For the Pioneers wing, he deserves to be in there because he sort of ushered in the kind of new modern era of the UFC.
Him and Matt Hughes and Tim Sylvia and Chuck Liddell, to a different degree, they all kind of were these bridges between the dark ages and what we have more in the more modern era. And I'm okay with that.
He did coach Ultimate Fighter when it was an important series, when it was significant.
Yeah, season 2, right?
Yeah, that was the second season. So, and I think we can agree, unlike Matt Hughes' personal issues, Franklin's kept his nose clean, and he's been a great ambassador in front of the camera, behind the camera.
Well, he's doing some pretty. He's a VP of something or other for One right now, isn't he?
Yeah. He's an executive for One Fighting, and he's a good dude. I mean, he's just a good guy.
He was an important ambassador for the sport at a time when a lot of people associated it with.
Right. He was a math teacher.
Mm-hmm.
He's good. Always never got into trouble. Just always an unassuming kind of gentleman. And here he is fighting in a combat, cage fighting. Like what? And he was kind of the face of, like, they come in all shapes and sizes, and they're not all these bloodthirsty brutes. They can be these sort of unassuming, just smart, college educated gentlemen, who have a passion for martial arts and the disciplines of combat.
I mean, you and I were both in the MMA sphere at the time when his name was kind of trotted out as the example that, and I mean, MMA versus boxing was a big narrative at the time. And one of the things people would bring up if you were vehemently defending MMA was, look at the caliber of people you have in boxing. You have, and I never made this argument because I don't necessarily believe it, but it was made, that you've got a lot of people who came from the streets who can't really who can't balance their checkbook in boxing, who are being taken advantage of. And then you have Rich Franklin, who's got a master's degree in education and taught math at, I think, the high school level, and was just he was that kind of ambassador for the sport about, again,
we needed at the time,
was definitely needed at the time. Absolutely was needed.
So yeah, I'm in that regard, I think it makes sense to put him in there.
Yeah, I'm completely okay with it.
Let's see. A few other fights got announced.
Okay, let me start here with the fight announcements.
Yeah, go ahead.
Both Khabib Nurmagomedov and Dustin Poirier have mentioned a September date for their potential title unification bout. Which
Khabib was on. That's what he said to ESPN yesterday.
Poirier's tweeted about that. He's down for that date. And frankly, after the fight he had with Max, giving him that kind of recuperation time would make a lot of sense.
That is that's the placeholder until UFC makes a new deal with Conor McGregor, and the clause of that new deal is an immediate rematch with Khabib. You're Magomedov, because that's what's going to happen ultimately.
Somebody else floated an idea, and I can't remember where I heard this from, but if the UFC is kind of being a stickler about not giving Conor an immediate rematch with Khabib, what if Conor came out and said, I want a rematch with Poirier? Just because, Conor did stop him in the first round of their fight.
He could, but how would that look?
It would look like him getting a title shot. And don't get me wrong, interim, I'm not saying it's the real thing, but, Conor does stuff like that. And here's the other.
Every other week he was challenging like the winner of a main event. He 1 week it was Cerrone, the next week it was Anthony Pettis. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I completely understand.
And then the next week he's retiring for the second time from MMA. So
it's weird. Conor's a weird guy, and we're never quite sure what's going to come about with him. And that's
all I'm saying is, if I was Poirier, I would get like a trustworthy, reliable lawyer on retainer.
I would absolutely look about getting that in writing. That said, again, if you're Dustin Poirier and Conor calls you out, Conor's a comparable fight from a, star power standpoint, maybe even bigger. And I think Conor's a much better matchup for Dustin than Khabib is. So
I agree, but and I like Dustin. I can't in good conscience pick him over Khabib.
Again, there's a few things he does that I think Khabib has to be mindful of, but
look,
the only guy in that entire division right now that I really have to think about, again, you say Khabib against anyone in that division other than Tony Ferguson, I pick Khabib. And if it's Tony, I might still lean towards Khabib.
Dustin's boxing has, I think you would have to agree, his boxing has increased tremendously. His boxing skills, he did not. His striking was nowhere near that good when he first got into the UFC.
Not even. It wasn't that good.
He was more of a grappler. He was more of a grappler, submission artist. Now he's a high level. Maybe I wouldn't call him elite, but he's a very high level striker now.
Yeah, the book on Dustin for a long time was he's a brawler grappler.
Right.
And now he's refined elements of his striking. If you look,
he looked very technical against Holloway.
For prolonged periods of that fight, yes. There's still a few times when they both just kind of get crazy, but it's a fight. That happens.
Right. And that's the area where I could see giving Khabib problems, because Khabib has gotten hit a few times. Didn't Johnson hit him a few times in their fight? He got tagged a little bit.
Johnson hit him once or twice.
And that's an area. Now that Poirier has proven he's a threat there, that could be a problem that Khabib has to watch out for. But I'm still picking. If the fight happens, I got to go with Khabib there.
Yeah, again, I pick Khabib over anyone in that division, and there's only two guys I really have to sit down and analyze and think about. But yeah, and at the moment, the only card the UFC has scheduled for September would be 242, which is they're going back to Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, which makes me kind of wonder whether or not that fight would headline that, because
at least they're not going to Saudi Arabia.
Abu Dhabi's been okay with them, having the weird start times. Because look,
have they not had an Abu Dhabi fight since the Edgar Penn and then Silva Maia fight? Was that the last one?
Let me see. No, they had Nelson versus Nogueira in 2014, but that was the last one.
Wow. Well, still, that's several years.
Yeah, it'll be over 5 years, assuming that event goes through as currently
It's been a
proposed.
while. And that was considering they had Abu Dhabi minority ownership in the company.
Yeah, I think they bought them out recently.
Yeah,
but...
yeah. After the WME sale.
But yeah, no, that it's been a number of years since they put something together in that part of the world.
I wonder if the Flash Entertainment investors got more than what they put into the UFC.
Who knows?
I'm curious, like what they paid, like I think $100 million for their piece, and I wonder what WME IMG gave him to offload. But I'm curious about.
I would imagine they turned a profit.
Yeah, I would assume, since the owners I think made out very well from that deal, including Dana White as a minority owner.
Oh no! I actually don't think they got bought out as part of that deal. I think they very recently got bought out.
I thought they got bought out with the WME sale.
I'd have to double check. I know there was some other Middle Eastern investment group that got bought out recently. That might have been
okay. I was thinking of the Flash Entertainment people.
It might have been them. It might have been someone. It might have been some other kind of like Saudi royalty, or some other There's a lot of money in that part of the world.
So here we go. I have the. It said in 2018, Flash Entertainment sold their 10% stake.
Okay.
Then WME.
Yeah, then it would have been. There was another group. I think genuinely from Saudi Arabia.
And
recently.
Okay, so it was recent though. So the WME sale was in 2016. The Flash Entertainment sale was 2018. So there was a bit of separation there.
Okay, it might have been that. It might have been something else. There were a few other different groups that had minority ownership stakes in the UFC that they might be just buying out recently to consolidate.
I think Mark Cuban even he had some sort of. I think what I read once, or what I recall, Dana White once said that Mark Cuban had bought some of their debts, whatever that means. So
that usually gets you some kind of minor equity stake.
Yeah,
and they've probably bought him out of that by now. So.
Right, but this was when I recall him saying that was years and years ago.
Yeah, I mean it probably was. I mean Mark Cuban got into the MMA business.
So here's a couple other things. Molly McCann versus Ariane Lipsky at UFC in Greenville.
Let's see. Greenville, that's ESPN plus 12. Yeah, they announced a few more fights for that card. Andrea Lee got a fight on that card.
Conor McGregor had an exhibition bout at Kremlin Boxing Club.
Whoop-de-freaking-do. You had a boxing exhibition bout.
So maybe he's gonna do more boxing. Maybe he'll fight Paulie Malignaggi. How do you say it?
Malignaggi.
Malignaggi. There you go. I think Artem Lobov is going to fight Malignaggi, apparently, or so he says.
There's a bare knuckle federation that's looking to make that happen. Look,
would Paulie I'm sorry. Would Paulie Malignaggi actually go through with that, Robert? You think?
It depends on the money being offered and how verifiable it was.
I don't know. I've heard like that bare knuckle stuff is not like from what I've hear like guys still haven't gotten paid for that.
Some of that depends on which federation you're talking about. Some of them, yeah. I don't know. I don't know exactly.
If it's bare knuckle, I just find it hard to believe that'll actually go forward.
I mean, Artem Lobov had a bare knuckle fight recently with
Artem
Jason
Lobov.
Knight.
I mean, it makes no sense for Paulie to do that though.
I think Paulie will only do it if the money's right, if he can prove that he gets the money, and if he can leverage that into a bigger fight. I think Paulie's thought process is if I beat up Artem, then I can use that to leverage Conor to fight me. And Conor's a big payday, and I mean, frankly, Paulie probably beats him if we're talking just boxing.
You know, looking at this whole thing with Darren Till, I think the guy was just having some emotional issues. He was probably coked up, probably drunk, went on a bender, wrecked a hotel room, and just, Also, he is from Liverpool. So he's probably He's probably used to doing such things. Don't you agree? Come on.
I'm not going to cast horrible aspersions at the entire city of Liverpool off the basis of Darren. Don't get me wrong. There's parts of Liverpool. I have no doubt that every major city and major metropolitan area has hooligans. I imagine Liverpool's no different in that respect. So, okay.
Do we know he wasn't a hooligan before he came into the UFC?
I couldn't tell you one way or the other. I do not have that information. Again, as far as fight announcements, we have the UFC announced 3 more events and locations. A couple of these do not have venues yet.
Here's another fight for Greenville: Darren Wynn versus Marcus Perez.
Darren Wynn making his UFC debut. I'm kind of interested in that. Darren Wynn's very, very good wrestler. Got a very awkward body. He's got some potential. I think he trains out of AKA. So I'm seeing him fight in the UFC. I'm down. He's someone to pay attention to. Again, we got a few other locations. There's a fight night that will be held in Montevideo, Uruguay on August 10th. At least that's been announced. Again, no venue at the moment, but the UFC knocking off another country. Because I don't think they've never been to. Have
they ever been to Sealand?
I don't know. I'm not sure what joke you're making.
Principality of Sealand.
No, I would assume not.
Well, that's one country they still need to go to.
I mean, they haven't been to the Vatican either. They announced the event UFC 242 for Abu Dhabi.
Once we're done, Google Principality of Sealand.
I will. We also they announced a fight night for Sao Paulo, Brazil in November. There's some kind of expectation that that's going to be Jose Aldo's last fight in the UFC. Because assuming Aldo sticks to his guns about three fights in Brazil in 2019, and the last one will be his last match. That'll fight out his UFC contract. So we have that potential date. That actually does have an arena attached, but so we're still missing a fair amount of July onward is still very open. We have a few more again shows and dates for that, but again, not a whole lot of major announcements just yet as far as upcoming fights, but I imagine in the next couple of weeks we'll see a bunch of these get fleshed out. Okay. That's everything I had, so anything else that you wanted to touch on, Jeff?
I think that about covers it for me for this week.
Alrighty then. It's been a couple of weeks, so what would you like to plug?
All right, so Tuesday I will be seeing Avengers Endgame. I can say that now. I will be providing an official review. It will be spoiler-free, so you don't have to worry about that. Also, I have been approved to cover All Elite Wrestling's Double or Nothing, so I will be providing some live onset coverage for that. We went viral with a very hot story this past week. I talked to Tony Maglio of The Wrap, the reporter who broke the news story about All Elite Wrestling being in talks with Turner Sports, Warner Media, for a TV deal. And it was floated to us via Tony Maglio that apparently, or so he says, AEW would be paying for TV time, and this news made the internet. It didn't break the internet, but it made the internet explode. And we got quite a lot of impressions off of that story, Robert. So I'm very proud of that interview. You can still check that out that interview on our YouTube channel, on our iTunes 411 Wrestling Interviews podcast, and we have another big interview in the works this week with all I'll say is this: it's a WWE Hall of Famer. It's not official yet, so I don't want to jinx it. But
you finally got Coco Beware. Good for you.
I don't think Wait. When did Coco Beware get in?
Oh, like years ago. The Birdman.
Really?
That's kind of the joke.
Oh, Coco Beware. Yeah. Okay. I was okay.
Again,
yeah, Coco Beware got in 2000, 2009. 2009.
Yeah, like 10 years ago.
Yeah, so 10 years ago. So no, it's not Coco Beware. It is a recent WWE Hall of Famer, but it's not official yet, and I'm hoping it will happen this week. So if it does happen, be on the lookout for that, and it will be all over our website and our iTunes channel and our YouTube channel. So fingers crossed. That's all I'll say. A recent WWE Hall of Famer. We'll see. And so that, and another movie I'll be reviewing is the Tolkien biopic, which I did not like at all.
I hadn't given much thought to that
movie. It's a decent
actually.
Cast. If you're a fan of Tolkien literature, like, what annoyed me is that it caters to fans of the Lord of the Rings movies and not like actual Tolkien files, I believe. Just because
those who forget that Tolkien did stuff other than Lord of the Rings.
Well, not just that. I just feel like it's very tacky. Like, you see, here's an example of why I didn't like the movie. Like, you see Tolkien in his military service and in the Great War and all that, and which
was hugely important in formulating his worldview and some of the narratives that he chose to employ.
Right. Correct, but there are a number of scenes in the movie where he has this faithful confidant and companion during the Great War, and guess what his name is? His name is Sam. Come on now.
Well, if memory serves, forgive me, I'm not up on my Tolkien history. He did, in fact, the story of the four hobbits leaving to destroy the ring is, in many respects, the story of him and his friends who'd left to serve in the war, and only one of them came back.
I think more than one came back.
I'd have to double check. I want to say he was the only one who survived.
I see the parallels, but I just naming one of his compatriots in the movie after Sam. I just found that tacky. It felt superficial to me.
I'd have to double check, because if that's the actual name of his friend, and he did just name his friend the character after a friend that he served with, then fair play to them for accuracy. But I would have to double check that.
But it felt like they don't explore this very much. It's a very superficial relationship.
Okay.
So, and that's kind of what bothered me about the movie. It felt. But if you're a fan of the Lord of the Rings movie, you might enjoy this. But so I will be reviewing that film as well.
Isn't that Nicholas Hoult? Isn't Nicholas Hoult the lead?
Yeah, I'm not a big Nicholas Hoult person.
Okay.
I'm
about 50-50 on him, so I'm not a huge fan.
I'm still not good with him for his performance as the Beast in the X-Men films. I think he's the worst possible actor they could have gotten to play Henry McCoy.
That is a significant overstatement.
Yeah.
I know
are you saying that?
I'm okay with your criticism in general, but they could absolutely have done worse.
I do not like how Beast has turned out with Nicholas Hoult playing the character. It is not a good Beast at all. Kelsey Grammer was a better Beast, basically.
Well, Kelsey Grammer also had much less screen time, so he got to just kind of be there briefly.
With his less screen time, he was far better than Nicholas Hoult. So there you go. That's all I have.
I'd have to double check how much of that was the writing too, because again, your point is, I agree with a lot of your point, but I do wonder how much of that is how they chose to write the character this time around.
Well, I mean, if you see my write-up for the Dark Phoenix panel at WonderCon,
I did.
Okay, so why does Beast take his drugs or whatever and go his non-blue form when he gets to the X-Mansion? That makes no sense.
Now, them turning him into a werewolf was just a bad idea.
Where,
and again,
yeah, well, not just werewolf. Like, why you're at an institute with other mutants, where, okay, maybe around other people you kind of want to hide who you are. I mean, I can kind of understand that, just because, maybe there's a safety issue, or maybe you're worried about people not understanding. I can kind of understand that, but why are you turning to look more human when you're at the X-Mansion? To me, it's disgusting. It's despicable. It's a betrayal. It's a betrayal to everything those characters are. I'm sorry.
I mean, Beast always hated his form. That was one of his major things. He wanted to reverse the way he looked.
I understand that, but why would he do it? Why would he be blue out in public, but when he gets back to the X-Mansion, when he's around other mutants, he would not have that form? It makes no sense at all.
I haven't seen anything to do with this movie.
Why is he worried about other mutants seeing him that way? That doesn't make sense, Robert. I'm sorry.
No, I'd have to see the movie itself to really kind of break that down in any sort of.
Mystique does the exact same thing.
Well, in Mystique's case, it's budgetary.
Well, I mean, there's no logistical reason for that. There's none. You can do that, but you have to explain it at least. I mean, it makes no sense.
No, I don't disagree with you about that.
Okay.
And once I actually see that terrible, terrible movie, I will have more formulated perspectives on it. That was
a big thing for me when I saw that panel at WonderCon a little while ago. But Avengers Endgame, so I wouldn't mind talking to you more about that one. I'm sure we will have a lot to discuss there.
In a couple of weeks when it comes out. We'll probably.
It comes out Friday.
Well, when we can talk about it then. Yeah, it does come out Friday. I will be seeing it Thursday, so.
Makes sense. You kind of want to,
late Thursday I'll be seeing it.
You want to see it at your leisure, which is good.
Yeah, my leisure in this instance being 11:45 on a Thursday.
Not bad. Get in before the crowds.
Oh no, I had to go pretty deep to find a show that wasn't sold out.
That's the first showing you could get. That's quite amusing, actually.
No, that wasn't the first. Like the earliest showing I think is Thursday at like 8 here, because it's all scaled to Eastern Standard. And yeah, there were like 10 showings that were completely sold out. I started going down the time, and the one at 12:20 was slightly more open, but not enough to where, all right, fine. I
wouldn't want to go to an 8 a.m. either. So I mean, yeah.
Oh no, 8 p.m.
Oh, 8 p.m.
Yeah, so that was the one I could get to that I felt I could find a decent seat, was the 11:40. So
hey, what if Nicholas Hoult were to play Batman, to be the next Batman? What would you think of that?
Meh. I mean, that's a giant meh for me.
Would you prefer Armie Hammer?
A little, but not hugely.
Miles Teller.
Oh God, no, Miles Teller.
Thank you for that. But yeah.
I don't know why. Look, Miles Teller got I maintain Miles Teller's still a thing just because J.K. Simmons made him look great in Whiplash.
Yeah.
I don't know why Miles Teller is still a thing. I genuinely don't.
I won't go that far, but I'm not a huge Miles Teller fan, but whatever.
Like everything he's done over the last 6 years, I've looked at that and went, why you? Like, why are you here?
He had a couple success stories.
I'd have to go through his filmography in more detail. And look, between Thank You for Your Service and The Four Stick, just no. I'm done. All right. As for myself, you can find me this Tuesday on Damn You Hollywood. We have a late review this week because nothing of value came out. We'll be reviewing Pet Sematary. That is myself, Jason Teasley, and Alexis Hana. And that is... Oh, God, that movie. I was pretty disappointed. So you can hear us talk about that as per usual on Damn You Hollywood. The latest Damn You Hollywood did not feature me because I could not get to see Hellboy before the show, and I blame my car. It broke down. Didn't have it over the weekend. Couldn't get to see it before the appropriate time on Tuesday.
I want to see the new Hellboy. I just haven't gotten around to doing it yet.
Yeah, so I'm gonna see, like, maybe if it comes to a dollar theater around here, I'll go see it. But in my place is Ronnie Adams, so Ronnie and Mark talk about
do
Hellboy.
dollar theaters still exist?
In my neck of the woods, they do.
I mean, I'm all for it if they do.
Yeah. They don't get, like, they never get first run stuff, but you know, stuff on its last legs. And as far as the movie theaters go, I'd have to double check if the one that I used to go to is still in business. But yeah, discount theaters are a thing in Utah at the moment. They are, so for whatever that's worth. This Friday will be an interesting episode. This Friday will be the conclusion of my Countdown to Endgame series of podcasts. Myself, Mark Radulich, and Alexis Haina have been together. We've tackled the first 2 phases of the MCU. You can find those in the archives. We talk about phase 1, phase 2, the characters, the narratives, some of their interactions. I've been having a lot of fun with it. This week is phase 3, and we will all have actually seen Avengers Endgame. And depending on what happens in that movie, we might be talking about it from purely a narrative perspective on Thursday.
You should do a series going over the Star Wars trilogies, the Star Wars eras.
I hate Star Wars. Okay, hang on. Serious note. For those interested in that, because I'm not a Star Wars fan, a friend of mine does a podcast, has a ongoing podcast called, I think it's A More Civilized Podcast. And it's, I think, 3 or 4 of them. They have kind of a rotating cast that talk about all things Star Wars. So if you are interested, I'll plug my high school friend there.
I'm going to check that out
now. Just don't hold me accountable for the content, okay? I know they do it. If you hate it, fair play, but don't blame me. We'll be back again this Saturday. I will have coverage of UFC on ESPN or UFC on ESPN Plus, whatever they decide to go with. That's so weird that's not been made more clear at this point. And next Sunday, we'll be back here to review that card, and I believe we'll be previewing Fight Night 151. That'll be 27th, 28th, and that is the 4th. Yes, we will be previewing Iaquinta versus Cowboy, which is... It's a card. I like the main event. I really do. Iaquinta and Cerrone should be a lot of fun. Cub Swanson and Shane Burgos has some pretty serious violence potential. So there's some stuff there to look forward to. We'll give you a full preview of that next week. But that's going to be it for us this week. Thank you all very much for listening. Deeply appreciated as always. Share us around if you have friends that are into the sport, please. Need more views. Need more listens. Always appreciated. Stay safe out there until then, and please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.